Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think everyone should be in now. We will be recording this event, Why Not Aid, with a conversation with Dean Spade. So I just wanted to let everyone know, please feel free to chat or ask questions using the chat function. There will be a moment at the end of the event where we'll be able to kind of open up the discussion. Gia, could you go ahead and start the slides? Beautiful. Okay, so this is Why Not Aid with Dean Spade. This is one of a series of programs that we've been doing as a part of Heat Aid, which is an initiative that we started up this summer during the excruciating heat waves in Los Angeles. Could you go to the next slide, please? So just to summarize what we'll be doing today, first, Alyssa's going to summarize some of the mutual aid work that we did this summer and our experience doing that kind of work. I'm going to give a little book report on the reading that everyone had access to and hopefully enjoyed. And then we're going to have a fishbowl conversation, which means that a number of our audience members have elected to kind of come to the table and have a conversation about the material. You know, this isn't necessarily a lecture, this isn't necessarily a seminar. We're hoping that having everyone kind of bring their own experiences and their own kind of expertise to the table will make this material very engaging. And then we'll have some audience questions. And then another member from our M&A program board. We have these gray neutral backgrounds. One of our members will give kind of a final reflection. So with that, I will hand it off to Alyssa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa, and I'm a public programs intern here at M&A. Why Not Aid? This conversation today is a component of Heat Aid, M&A's mutual aid initiative that pairs direct action with public programming to address water and shade inequity here in LA. Heat Aid emerged over the past several months to directly meet the needs of our neighbors experiencing homelessness here in LA. And at first, the directive was very straightforward. Houseless folks need water and essential supplies like PPE, particularly to help endure the extreme heat that came along with the grueling record-breaking heat waves, as Aubrey mentioned, of August and September. This effort was in collaboration with SELA, Streetwash, Water Drop, and many more organizations that we have partnered with since, and led to the activation of the M&A storefront to become a drop site where water, PPE, hygiene kits, and other supplies could be donated during our drop-off hours and stored for our partners to distribute. Well, what was one triple-digit heat wave became many subsequent heat waves throughout September and October, and concurrently days and weeks of poor air quality, introducing a whole other set of concerns when it comes to exposure. The images in these slides primarily capture water at the drop site, but are also a snapshot of our progress as we manage weekly drop-offs, pickups, and as needs and capacity started changing. And whether it was a super busy drop-off day with over 200 gallons of water being donated, or a slower day when I was able to have a conversation with each person donating, we began to understand a bit more about how these needs exist in so many different ways. And through our programs, we've been able to delve into how basic needs that folks in our city have are not met. Water, shade, housing, these are human rights that have been transformed into commodities in our city. This work is all ultimately impacted by how we come together to address these needs and do so in an effective, horizontal, and responsible manner. And Dean, your text guides us when reflecting on the role of an organization like M&A in this work. Why is it and how is it that an org that's focused on building a public culture of experimental architecture has now only after a couple months collected hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water and thousands of dollars in donation for these basic essential needs? M&A's heated working group, which all of us with the green background are part of, we've developed a set of public programs that has been able to take a step back and set aside time to reflect on the difficulties that exist for folks doing this work, particularly those who have done this work way before the start of the pandemic. As we'll discuss today, mutual aid initiatives take a lot of commitment and collaboration, and one of the most important reflections we have gathered is that they require being intentional and clear about our efforts, whether that is in relation to the way we at M&A work internally or how we organize those who are skilled in outreach and distribution through Heat Aid. I want to thank you all again for joining, especially on a Saturday morning. And also want to encourage you all to check out the Heat Aid programs on our website and continue to support our partners in these efforts. Yeah. Thank you, Aubrey. Turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Alyssa's been doing incredible work. Yeah, coordinating just the sheer logistics is like truly a capacity issue when it comes to these kinds of resources. Like there's so much will and like desire to contribute and like help from a lot of people, but organizing that will is really complicated, and we have really bad skills. like these are not skills that come natural to us, I think, culturally. So could you advance the slide? So I think, Dean, in your book, you kind of make a case that mutual aid is something that can address, immediate needs, but it also touches kind of very large structural problems. Like it's a kind of tool that happens at the same time. It allows us to talk about, So I think, in reading this book, today, I think we'll be talking about like the real material crises, the several crises that are going on right now in our lives, and our local and kind of national lives too. And those are very serious, like those are very pressing, but I think we'll also have the ability to talk about our own personal relationships with each other, like how we work, how we understand our like role in how we work. And I think the contrast between those two realities can seem very dissonant, but I think I would like to challenge us to see how those actually exist on the same spectrum. How we work in our daily lives really should be kind of connected to like these things that we care about, and they are connected to those things. Like the crisis is functioning at multiple levels. So with that kind of editorial note, I'll kind of briefly summarize some of the ideas. Gia, could you advance the slide? Thanks. Awesome. So yeah, we sent you out these 3 chapters. Can you go to the next slide? And so in the first one, we have the 3 key elements of mutual aid. So the first one, this one is really about how collective care could actually describe a lot of traditions that Indigenous people have used for centuries to resist colonial power. And also, they've been highlighted in the movements of the 60s and 70s. But, this tradition has existed for a long time, and, we can continue to find new ways of doing this work. And mutual aid networks have become very popular right now, I think for a really great reason. I think the book also talks about how, when we express our needs, when we connect with each other and, declare that like we have needs that aren't being met, it is a kind of expression that there is something wrong. It's a challenge to power, or at least it kind of brings up the way that things are right now, and the fact that our needs aren't being served. So the second one, that mutual aid projects mobilize people, expand solidarity, build movements, is about the fact that, when we start to organize around needs rather than around single issues, or rather than around, traditional avenues of power through politics and things like that. When we focus on need, we encounter people who also have the same needs as us, but may have lots of other different, aspects of their lives that are different than ours. So we build an understanding of, other people's lives, other people's needs, and it starts to connect us and build solidarity, and starts to, create an understanding of community. And then the third key element is that mutual aids are participatory, solving problems through collective action rather than waiting for saviors. And so this point is really about how, if you have an immediate task, you have to figure out how to do it. So it kind of bypasses a lot of the structures that we have that require expertise or professionalism or laws sometimes, and it allows us to learn new things, learn how to get things done. And that is a very empowering thing for all of us to be able to do, is to look at the present situation and do something about it. Can you go to the next slide? So in this chapter, I think is really, really important. I think what's important about looking at the history of charity and of private nonprofit organizations is that they've been serving a purpose that should be furnished by the government, by our people, by our neighbors. They are limited sometimes to managing problems rather than solving them. There are often kind of thresholds for gaining resources, the question of deservingness. And I think ultimately the idea that charities and nonprofits are there to kind of pick up the slack isolates these kind of politics from our daily lives. So those people take care of it. We do our work, they do their work. Now they're kind of separated. I think there's a lot of interesting information here about the purpose of missions and a lot of the organizations and companies that we work for. Can you advance to the next slide? And then finally, in No Masters, No Flakes, this is like an incredible resource. I would recommend that everyone kind of look through it to kind of look for resources for how to rethink their working relationships, because this is a guide for how to do mutual aid work if you want to do, a mutual aid network. But it includes a lot of information about how to create consensus, how to communicate in an equitable way, how to resolve conflict. Like, conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Difference is not a bad thing, and developing the tools to resolve those kinds of encounters is like the primary skill. It also, there's a lot of information in there about burnout and perfectionism, which I thought were just wonderful, because I think we all deal with that a little bit. So this is the end of my kind of summary of this. Again, we have all of these pages, so if you didn't get the PDF or you would like it to be resent, just let us know. If you could advance to the next slide. So I wanted to finish up with this question and kind of begin our conversation. So this is quotation from the first chapter, but it says, "This work is based in the belief that those on the front lines of a crisis have the best wisdom to solve the problems, and that collective action is the way forward. So, Dean, I wanted to use this question to kind of bring you into the table here. I think what's really amazing about this quote is that it highlights the relationship between knowledge and power, or like that we, whose knowledge is best, like who decides, what it is that we do. Our experience is the same as knowledge, like, who has access to what kinds of knowledge. I think that that's something that, architects, artists, like we always deal with that question a lot. So you're a lawyer. So that's another profession that requires extensive training. It has a very kind of rigid disciplinarity, but it also describes the world in a very abstract way. You learn about policy and the philosophy of laws and things like that. So I wonder, in your training and in your practice as a legal expert, I wonder how you experienced the friction between this kind of organizing idea and that, part of your own training and your own practice. Like, was there a moment when this became very important or present to you?
That's a really interesting question.
Oh, I think we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Can everyone else hear you?
Yes.
We can hear.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I was an organizer before I was a lawyer. So I came in, the reason I went to law school is because I was part of movements, especially in the late 90s in New York City, pushing back against the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, who was like, brutally engaging with all kinds of things like, criminalizing street vendors and trying to rezone Times Square into what it is now, if you've been to New York in the last couple decades, into like a sort of family play place when it had been a place where there was a lot of sex work. And he was intensely pushing poor people and homeless people towards jails and prisons and changing the welfare system and the housing court system, and just an intense, multifaceted attack on poor people of color, immigrants, sex workers, queers, raids on all the queer bars, which is what I did for a living, was worked in them. And it was just a very intense moment for learning about solidarity-based struggle. And a lot of us were really working across lots of different communities to push back against his administration and against policing and against anti-poor policy and doing that from a direct action place. So I spent time like getting arrested with my friends and being in jail and being with other people, understanding like the law as just like one of the really terrible obstacles, and having to often work with lawyers, either because we were dealing with people we know being arrested, or we were being arrested, or because we were trying to fight particular policies like around AIDS housing or whatever. And just like lawyers sucked and like were just, really technocratic often, and didn't, were really non-responsive, there were exceptions, of course, but like often weren't part of the grassroots movements that their work was somehow connected to. And so they were kind of like, they were professionals, it was just really, so anyway, I went to law school really because I wanted to engage in that movement work with that additional tool. And the further I went into that, the more I learned that the profession is designed to make sure you don't do that and to really limit, like I'm not going to go into all that, but I think that like, a lot of what this quote is about for me that you've pulled out is like the way that, obviously I believe our legal system is like built on white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism. So it's not going to deliver any justice, right? But it's more like an obstacle we have to deal with. We can't avoid it. We need to support people who are being devoured by it. But I don't think like any answers are going to come from there, or any of like the things we're trying to build. So part of what happens in the sort of charity dynamic that you were describing before is that when there are social problems, which of course emerge from living in these horrible systems, the aim of charity, and there's lots of different professional aims of that, including poverty lawyers, but also social workers, and also policy around education or whatever. The aim of it is to like act upon the people facing crisis and assume that like elites know what they need to do to become better people who won't be in this crisis. It's like about blaming them instead of blaming the system that produces the crisis. So it's, we need to design the shelters in these ways to make people become sober. We need to design, you know, the schools in these ways to make these students learn tech skills instead of like, you know, actually looking at why there's extreme poverty in particular communities and why that's worsening. And so part of this is about like the people on the front lines of the crisis know, like the people who are experiencing crisis actually know how the system works. The elites have fantasies about fixing those people. And that's often what like charity interventions and a lot of policy interventions look like. And the part around collective action being the way forward is also just like that elite solutions, like if only everybody knew, or if we just get the right design in here, that they don't fix it, you know? So it's not as if there's no relationship to them, but they need to come out of collective action and the wisdom of collective action. So it's really a lot about, everybody has a role in this work, but it's about like really reshuffling where we think the wisdom is around how the system is currently working and what needs to be done.
Absolutely. And I think that that fact of it's about how we communicate about what the problem is, how we decide what the solutions are, like that's really the issue here. And I think that's an issue that we all really struggle with in our, you know, professional lives. So I want to hand it over to the fishbowl now. So this is a group of, I think we have about 10 people in our audience who decided to come and have a conversation. We won't be introducing ourselves just in the interest of time, but when you do speak, if you'd like to jump in, which I hope you do, just briefly say your name and maybe like what you do. Yes, so with that, Kendall is going to kind of give us our first prompt. Oh, I think we're done with the slides too, so we can go back to gallery view. Yes, Kendall, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kendall. And the first question that we're asking today is regarding knowledge and information and how that directly ties into access. So who has the knowledge to address problems, and how is that knowledge shared amongst differing and various communities? Also, what kind of information would actually improve the impact of your work? Why do you or do you not have access to that information?
Well, I guess I can start. Hello, my name's Anita. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of Gia's students at the University of Toronto, all the way over in Toronto, Canada. When we're talking about what types of information would be useful, I'm still a student, so this is in a theoretical self, but in a theoretical framework, but I feel personally that other people's ways of living have been historically ignored for the sake of convenience, if not glossed over. And I think that we're continuing to see that within the age of social media, in that the realities of how people live are still highly curated. And we might think that we have the access and insight into the way that people live, but unless we have firsthand knowledge and or experience, we can never really begin to design for the communities in the ways that they may actually need. And it may be extremely difficult for those communities to come forward, or individuals, if they don't feel that there is a space for them to be able to truly express without sort of filtering for the eyes who are looking at them what they need from professionals or otherwise.
Hi, my name's Heidi. I can speak. Thanks for having this event. My name's Heidi. My pronouns are she, her, and I lead an art collective and work at JPL, and just have to have a disclaimer that these are my views and don't represent my employer. But in thinking about this question, interestingly, because of your profession, Dean, keep coming back to in all areas of my work, which are, there's a lot of different sort of places. There's architecture, and there's facilities, and there's art and music and wanting to start a nonprofit. But in terms of a lot of the information that I think I struggle most to like filter and understand is legal information, whether it's code or policy or law explicitly, especially in architecture, especially in urban planning and design, but really in all areas. And it's, a big part of the work that I try to do is to find ways to make that information, to like make the path to that information easier to follow, but I'm not sure if it's possible. So I'm not, so it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and this question provoked it again. So maybe I'll just start there. I guess, yeah, I'd be curious as the conversation moves forward, what like thoughts you might have to share on how to simplify access to legal knowledge that is sort of necessary to, it's not always necessary. I guess I'm of two minds. One is that, as you stated in your introduction, that you feel the legal system is based on imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy. So it's maybe an obstacle more than it is a tool, but at the same time, it is a tool that we have to use to do our work. And I know you must believe that, otherwise you wouldn't be a lawyer. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say I think that just in terms of professionals or like I do think that in our social movement work what we're trying to do is use different skills we have. So like some people can make like really beautiful posters, and some people like can sing really beautiful songs, and some people can make a whole band happen at the action, and some people can read a dry fucking thing to figure out who the target is in this complex administrative system that we're up against right now. And so to me, that's an ideal role, the people who have professionalized training, or there's also like lots of people who self-train on that stuff. Like some people are just good at this stuff. So not making professional training more important, because we all know like it's actually a mixed bag. And there's people who come through it who can't do the thing, and there's people who can do the thing and didn't go through it. But just like, how do I plug myself in a humble way and not pretend this is more important information than the other kinds of information people have? And then how do I also not need to get paid to do that? Like, I think that's the other thing about professionalizing, is it's like putting things basically behind a paywall. And for lawyers, what that looks like is, the poverty law system, like legal aid, it was designed to force. It was designed in the around the turn of the century, when there was huge numbers of European immigrants coming to places like New York City, living in tenement housing, working in like brutal factory conditions, and those people were organizing, and legal aid was designed to actually kill their organizing and have them bring their claims one by one through the American court system to assimilate them. And that's true of all charity programs. They're all designed to control the poor and to regulate the poor. But thinking about that, like, how do I not participate as a poverty lawyer in that way? And that means I need to not just do things that rich people or the government are paying me to do. And so I think one of the problems is how do we deprofessionalize our work, which doesn't mean not everybody is going to become literate in reading legal code or architectural code, nor does everyone need to. But how do we, I think there's a really intense thing happening where people like want to get paid for everything they do. Which on the one hand can be like, I don't want to be exploited. Yes, awesome. If you're working for Coca-Cola, you should fucking get paid. But like, if you're working in social movements, you might not get paid sometimes. Actually, like the bulk of social movement work is done and has always been done unpaid by very poor people, because it's life and death. And so how do we figure out how, like, when we do stuff, not as professionals, but use those kind of tools that we have to offer? And I think that this is a really complex question. That's like, how do we not be like, everyone should be exploited and do everything for free when there are resources? If somebody's getting paid, we got to talk about why it's white people, why it's men, why it's old people, whatever the thing is. But but the work is not going to happen. The real work we need to do is not going to happen paid. Like the most interesting work you do in your life will be unpaid. And I think all artists know this, and all musicians know this. And I imagine that architects know it in various ways. And so how do we, and I think lawyers know it. And so how do we kind of like confront our professional skills in a way that's about moving them out? And one of my fantasies about this that's never happened that I'm aware of is like, things like welfare hearings, housing court, like all this stuff, you don't have to be a real lawyer to do them. They're like these kind of kangaroo courts. Maybe some of you have been through it yourself or with loved ones or whatever. They don't have real rules of evidence, whatever. So what if like we were really deeply teaching in communities, like everybody had to do the parts that they can. Some people are never going to do this. They don't have the language skills, the literacy skills, whatever, so that's fine. But like what about if in every neighborhood there were lots of people trained up to do this? Because right now people go through these processes alone. Most people can't get a lawyer, right? There's no guarantees. So what if we really what if our goal was to deeply deprofessionalize and like make more available a lot of these kinds of technical skills? And I think in the way you see people right now teaching each other Zoom or other things people are doing that are kind of like trying to move out a lot of these pieces.
Dean, I really liked what you were saying about this question of pay, because one of the issues that we often contend with in architecture is this question of like, what is the true value of labor and who's getting paid within the context of our work? And I from, you know, when we run a cultural organization where the program board is all volunteer based, that's a huge discussion we're having internally all the time, right? Who gets paid and how do people get paid? But I also like the idea you're proposing essentially, which is that a monetary transaction is not the only transaction or exchange that can occur within a relationship that one has to either organizations or to groups or to one another. And that's something, and thinking carefully about what are the exchanges that are happening beyond the monetary is kind of some of the principles that undergird mutual aid work.
Hello, everyone. I can just jump into the fishbowl, right? I'm Rosario. I'm in lockdown in Berlin. I have a background in architecture, and I also work in many different organizations. A lot of work is volunteer-based, but I think for me, maybe an interesting question is who has the time to participate? In Berlin, there is a lot of let's say different experiences with participatory movements at many different levels, from community to more established ones in just in governmental structures and processes. But at the end of the day, it always comes to this question that who has the time to be available to take part in these processes. And I think I would like to also add to what Gia said about different kinds of, not only the monetary exchange. I think that's very important to make it visible, like time, for example, right? So I don't know what kind of tools you use in your different engagements to make this visible, or maybe it's more like a question, no? Like I would be very interesting to hear how do you value this, the different kinds of engagements, or yeah.
Can I speak, Gia? Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Holloway. My pronouns are she, her, and I've been wanting to respond to everything that everyone's been saying. But I'll kind of work backwards when I think about the question of who has the time for it. The reality is the people who have the time and the financial bandwidth and stability to do movement work are the people whom the movements are not for and in an effort to support. And the irony of that is so present to me. I have a friend who has only worked part-time. We went to college together. She's only worked part-time since college because she came into a large family endowment, and she reached out to me. She works part-time at a thrift fashion kind of antique store in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, if anybody knows Portsmouth. And she reached out to me and she said, my boss and I really, and her boss is also a white woman, my boss and I really want to create a set of community agreements because we put up this, Black Lives Matter poster in our shop. And now we really want to work with the African American Heritage Museum that's in Portsmouth. And I know that you could help us. And so she reached out to me and I said, yeah, let's do this. Let's do a visioning session and talk about your community values and your community agreements, but also it can't just be you and your boss, two white women who own the business. It needs to include the individuals who frequent your business. And something that my friend is really proud of is the fact that they have a very large queer and trans following, especially with young people in high school who want to try different types of drag aesthetic and things like that. So it's definitely valuable. And it was really interesting because I said, and then also something you can think about is what does it look like to become, you know, the kind of costume provider or drag costume provider in, you know, tandem with the African American Museum in Portsmouth. And as soon as I started laying out these ideas, and this was just over a half an hour conversation, her response was, well, I really want to take this step by step. And I don't want to get overwhelmed. And it was like, at the moment that you have, as a movement organizer, which I consider myself, at the moment that you offer that to the people who have the time, space, and money to do it, their biggest fear is, will I become uncomfortable? And anyone who works in movement organizing understands in advocacy that you are uncomfortable, hence why you are doing this work. And so the first thing she said was, I'm not sure, like a drag show and a partnership sounds kind of big. And then the next thing she said was, and I don't think my boss would be comfortable with like bringing the community to help set our community values. So she's already reeled in this project back to the voices and thoughts of two cisgender white women who have the comfort of owning a business and not having to be in movement work. So that's my first thought about that. But my other thought is, and I think Dean spoke to this really well, which is we exist in a government that is not predicated on benefiting our people. And so when we think about, you know, our public housing story in the United States, it's a story of segregation and isolation. And we all know that, starting from the very first types of World War II public housing, social housing that was provided by the government to where we are now, which is a profit run, you know, affordable housing world. But the reality is, not every country in the world has a history of affordable housing that is embarrassing. There are European countries who are proud of their affordable housing and the history they have of supporting the most vulnerable populations in their countries. And they don't look to those populations as the most or the least educated. They look to them as just as educated because their schools are as quality for them as they are for the rest of their populations. But they just don't have the financial resource just to be in the open market for housing. So I think the other thought about like the access to the types of knowledge that we're talking about when the woman from JP was talking, the reality is the government access to that knowledge of how our government works and how our government has programs that can actually support the work that we do. One, yes, the access to that knowledge, but two, our government isn't set up to support the work that we do. And I think that echoes what Dean said. And every sort of level and way that we can all kind of work towards that rearrangement of that system rather than treating the individuals who are subjected to that system as needing changing is key. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of add on to some of those thoughts. I'm Andrew, pronounce he and him, recent architecture graduate sort of in design, education, research right now. And just a sort of something that everything you said was reminding me of is just information about housing right now is also a very weird like industry in LA. I remember just at one point trying to get some very basic information just about, you know, evictions and vacancy and understanding who actually has that information, which is, you know, functionally, you know, no centralized place, no collection of places, even like just the idea that evictions are these things that, for better or worse, you know, can happen either within or outside of the legal system. You could be served an eviction and then evict yourself and no one will ever know that there was an eviction. At the same time, you don't necessarily want to have to enter the legal system if you're evicted. And so as a result, like if you want to find out like how many people has this landlord evicted, you're kind of out of luck. There are organizations that do track it, there are, or that try to track it. But there are also a lot of these things like evictions or vacancies are tracked by commercial real estate groups who are trying to advise, you know, developers as opposed to people representing, you know, the tenants themselves. And so I think it's just a, you know, a way I'd like to sort of phrase the question in my mind is more like, how can we, you know, repackage and repurpose that the collection and dissemination of the information so that it's targeted more towards the people whose hands it should be in, rather than thinking of it necessarily as a, you know, commercial profitable asset for other commercial entities.
I want to bring up another element of like the 3 elements of mutual aid that Aubrey touched on earlier. The quote from Dean's reading is, mutual aid projects are participatory, solving problems through collective action rather than waiting for saviors. And in this, we're kind of thinking about organizational structure and transparency and immediacy. And I'm wondering how our professional relationships impact our political imagination. Want to open that up to the fishbowl.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in. My name is Patrick. Pronouns he, him. I'm in LA, and I kind of been thinking about that, or want to come back to maybe Gia's comment and some comments earlier on. Like, I think there's a couple different directions that I'm like super interested in going in, and like one is the like more of the text itself, and like kind of getting into, well, like as especially this conversation around charity and like what other kinds of like economies can exist beyond monetary. Reminded me a lot of the book The Gift by Lewis Hyde, and like looking at, like, he looks at a lot of like Native American or indigenous like tribes, and how they would use things like shells and things like that would pass between people, and just kind of like groups that develop their own economy that have to do with like very much an identity of like an in-group. And I think a lot of even the kind of concept of mutual aid has to do with this idea of creating or relying upon a community or in-group. So I'm curious if that idea, like, so charity in a way like allows someone who's not in your in-group, like kind of putting aside all the issues with it, it allows someone who's not in your in-group to sort of supply some kind of aid. So I guess I'm curious if it's like if this is kind of an issue of like kind of empowering communities, like empowering themselves, or if there could be like another model for like someone who's not in the in-group to still have a way to kind of provide some kind of aid in a different, within a different alternate model that would leave aside the baggage that we have with existing kind of charities. But so that's kind of one kind of venue of conversation that I'm interested in, which would maybe, I'm curious to Dean to hear if you have any thoughts about that. But I'm also super interested in like what this has to do kind of with me and my circumstances, and I assume kind of a lot of other people here as like architects at whatever stage of their career, or at least like working in the architecture field or kind of near architecture, and what it means for like an architecture worker who works at a firm versus like an architecture owner, which ideally those wouldn't be like separate things, but I think largely they are still. I think like the kind of like Peggy Deemer wrote a article in Log recently about cooperatives, and I think that's a kind of like super interesting model in my mind as pertaining to like kind of small architecture firms and the possibilities that they could have with giving mutual aid to each other. But yeah, I think coming back to one of the, like, what questions of like what we're lacking is like very much architecture and legal profession have that same issue of like the codes being sort of protected and enshrined by layers of bureaucracy and licensing and all these professionalization and accreditation. I'm not sure how to end this, so I'm just going to stop talking now.
It makes me want to say some things. Oh, Audrey,
Oh, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to put you on the spot, but Mark, I know that you do a little bit of work with rethinking how architects kind of work with each other. And so I was wondering if you could kind of speak to this in terms of, you know, how we accomplish things and how like our associations kind of, you know, can generate or kind of fuel the products that we're actually able to accomplish.
Yeah, I can. Is there another Mark that's addressing this? I just want to make sure I'm the correct Mark.
Talk to you, yeah.
I've talked, yeah. Well, I guess to go off of Patrick a little bit, maybe what I'm understanding is that it's not enough to just change the relationships amongst our professional circles in the office, but really we need to change the relationships with the people that we're designing for. And I'm thinking of Sasha Costanza-Chalk's work on design justice, where I've been a part of so many like charrettes, and I'm trained as an architect, and there's an issue of designing for imagined personas in design practices, and that's really coming from a person of privilege. I've been in an office where, you know, the head architect, usually a white male, will ask like, well, what does like the Mexican or like Chicano Black person want in this space? And I'll admit I was too young to like address that, but you know, it was immediately problematic for everyone. And so, yeah, I mean, it's more than just the relationships in our circles. It's relationships to how we design for others. And then maybe one thing I'll say that resonated with what Dean was saying. I mean, the lawyers sound a lot like architects, right? And I think one of the things that resonated was a practice of refusal as something that can be integrated. I mean, there's one of the leading architects like Studio Gang I just saw them present a POLIS station, like a community-centered police station, like even after this whole defund the police thing. And so it's, in terms of the information and learning, there's a lot of unlearning to be done in architecture, and unlearning a lot of the things that reinforce harm. And so I won't go, I can keep going off on architects, but maybe I'll stop there if anyone wants to continue.
Just to add on to what you said, I can't remember where I was reading the article, but in regards to not only the Black Lives Matter movement, which has resurged over the summer, but to Indigenous folks talking about, well, when you create a table of architects and you say, well, we want an Indigenous voice on this board, we want to bring in your perspective. There's a difference between bringing in somebody's perspective to the existing framework. And what this article was saying is, it's about time for architects to come and say, we have these resources, what can we do for you? Instead, in regards to working with, instead of saying, well, you can have your input on our already predetermined board and structure and system, but rather working with, and as Dean was talking about in his article on group dynamics, of making sure that everybody is equally heard and creating an inclusive environment to bring the services, and I guess kind of like reverse client dynamics in a way, to the communities and say, what can we do for you? Not what are we being told from somebody else to do for you, and about those imagined personas perhaps that Mark was speaking about.
I'd like to maybe direct that question towards Dean, because I would imagine in your experience you've performed as maybe a mediator between, you know, a community and some source of funding, some source of power or resources. I mean, you talk about, you know, the dangers of co-optation, but, you know, how have you seen groups kind of deal with this kind of client service dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, the key piece is like I'll just give you an example of like the migrant justice ecosystem of organizations in the Seattle, Tacoma area where I live, or in the Northwest. It's like we've got all these organizations that have paid people at them that are like the, you know, immigrant rights groups or whatever, and then we have like grassroots groups where people aren't paid, where this group I'm part of, Resistencia, where our goal is to close down the detention center in Tacoma. We run a hotline for people inside about conditions. We do direct actions like blocking deportation buses, and we support the hunger strikers inside. And we're border abolitionists. And for the 6 years we've existed, our work has been like refusing all the like deals that the other migrant justice groups that are more legit and paid and whatever, and more lawyers work and whatever, are like cutting with government to like make things look better, but actually it's the same shit. Like, so I think that this is a piece around like mutual aid is like the all the most radical work, all the most like transformative ideas are not going to come from like these architecture firms that I imagine you guys are talking about. And I really appreciate what Mark was saying about refusal. It's like there has to be a level where people are just like, we're never building or designing another prison or police station or immigration detention center ever again. And like there has to be groups that are doing this work that are like meeting in the places where people can meet who are directly impacted, and providing free childcare. This goes to a prior point about like who has time to do this work. Like people have time to do the work when there's food at the meetings, and when there's childcare at the meetings, and when there's interpretation at the meetings, and like making the work irresistible to people in lots of different ways, so that you are getting the right people in the room instead of just being like, oh, they didn't come because we had it in a way that they couldn't come to or wouldn't come to, you know, like all of that. And this kind of also goes to like Patrick's piece, I think, to some degree, about like what is the role of people who are, you know, we are, I think a lot of people on this call are like, we're elites, like we went through the professional training for various reasons. We entered different kinds of like white and sexist and colonial ideologies in order to do that. We've got that shit in our minds. It's really hard to shake up. It's really real. It affects how we shape spaces together. And so not being perfectionist, this is why there's stuff about perfectionism in the book. It's like I really see this with people. Like it's like, and even this story earlier that was really interesting about like the people who are like, but now you want me to collaborate and like bring in the community and like do this drag show. Like I'm scared, I'm losing control. That's what I hear in that story. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna get caught. People are gonna find out I'm racist. I'm gonna get caught. I'm gonna fuck up. Like, how do we like change, like this is those are like white colonial internalized norms. Like I need to do this correctly, and we all went through school, and school really pushes that on us. And like probably you all are like people who did well in school. That's how we ended up here together. That's who most people who are lawyers are. And so how do I like totally transform like my orientation to being in groups to one where like I might put my foot in my mouth, or I might feel like I'm not sure if I belong, or I might like learn a different kind of belonging that's not about doing things right, you know? That feels really like that's done through practice. And like, I would say the way to do that is not to do it as an architect, but to just become part of radical movements and then find out whether or not any of your architecture skills are relevant. But actually the skill that may be most useful is your ability to count bottles of water, or your ability to lift and carry something, or your ability to sit with somebody who's like really freaking out because they've just been hurt. Like we just don't, like, you know what I mean? And so it's like, yes, we want to like radicalize our professions as much as possible, and we want to create norms where nobody can ever look, you know, feel proud of building a police station ever again. We want to create those conversations all the time. We want to like try to be doing that transformation there. But if you're not also part of like actual grassroots work, it's just going to be this translation process where you're like having a kind of fake consultation meeting with some people who don't have homes or something, you know what I mean? Like where it feels really thin, and where, because it's like this is all relationship based, you know. But in order to like take those risks, to like be willing to deepen that relationship and show up and be in spaces where you don't feel certain you belong, and where you're like, maybe people are going to find out how bougie I am or whatever. Like, it's just about like, what does that take? I think what that really takes, like, what's this? There's nothing wrong with having those feelings. We are in these conditions, but the question is, what would I need to feel comfortable? Do I need to go with a friend? Do I need to have someone to talk to about the feelings that are coming? Like, taking our feelings seriously, our internalized perfectionism, our internalized white supremacy stuff, like taking it seriously, because otherwise you're gonna like be gritting and faking it and then like have some kind of like weird behavior explosion that's gonna hurt people. Like, that's usually what happens when people don't actually take seriously how immersed we are in a set of norms that we are enforcing on ourselves and that are being enforced on us, that keep us doing our professional jobs in ways that are system affirming. And that's what most lawyers and architects and social workers and teachers are doing. And so I feel like this part of what this book is trying to get at is like, and I really appreciate people saying positive things about the group dynamic stuff being useful to you, because it was risky to try to describe that carefully as somebody who has both spent time in elitist institutions, of course, like everybody in this space has, and I spent a lot of time in community-based groups where the norms are really different. And I think a lot of people haven't ever had a chance to do that. Like, I really recommend those videos that were made during Occupy about how people make decisions in General Assembly. Those videos are really useful to just be like, what's it like when hundreds of people make decisions outside together all at once and nobody's the boss or the most important or the smartest or the oldest? Like, most of us have never gotten to see that, except I would say sometimes in friendships. That's the place where people sometimes practice that. And so, and in groups of friends. And so that's also like, where do I already know something about this? And I also appreciated the reference to like people studying indigenous life ways and ways of making decisions. Like, that's where a lot of people are looking at like what were non-capitalist and what are non-capitalist or non-extractive ways that groups have been together with resources and defined wealth differently and defined connection differently. Like, those examples can be found in many places, but one place is in lots of different indigenous traditions and ways of getting stuff done and surviving together, which is like really what mutual aid is about.
Wow, that was great. I think translates really great to our like last fishbowl question that deals with this quote here. Mutual aid projects work to meet survival needs and build shared understanding about why people do not have what they need. What resources give you access to your current position? What is a common point of inaccessibility faced by a group that you're a member of? And then perhaps if your work does not address the survival needs of others, why not?
I can speak to that, but I also just wanted to say one more little piece of information responding to what Dean just said and what some other folks said earlier. Yeah, I don't know. I come from my entry point into higher education was through exposure to popular education and this idea that you can start, you know, that you can and should begin to teach when you maybe don't feel comfortable to, and begin to create networks of knowledge and pass knowledge from one to another when you're maybe not formally trained as an educator and you don't have that you just kind of have to rise to the occasion in the moment that you're in and start figuring out how to teach and learn collectively. So it's come up many times over my life, but in the last 6 months, it's been particularly salient. This speaking with people who feel people who I'm close to who and feeling this myself, feeling what you're describing, this anxiety about not wanting to expose yourself or not wanting to say the wrong thing, or wanting to engage and wanting to act, but feeling uncertain of your authority or self-conscious of your position or whatever. And I think it maybe like relates to what Taylor was saying earlier about her friends who own this vintage clothing store and wanting to engage, start in some form of community engagement, but all the problematics that maybe surround positionality in all these different ways. We're in such a complicated time and the ground is so shaky. I don't know, I've just been reflecting a lot on how important it is to start from where you are and just start, just start conversations, start start figuring out how to talk about the things that make you uncomfortable or that you don't know anything about, and start figuring out how to teach about things you don't know about. But it's I've been reading the information associated with this conversation in the chapters of like a new tension that I've been thinking about re-arose about, you know, the desire to teach and engage, and the danger of being sort of re-colonializing, you know, just forcing or pushing your knowledge in a way that can be counterproductive, and that we have blind spots to the ways in which sort of pushing our knowledge systems can be problematic. So I'm not really going anywhere with that. I'm just saying, I guess I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I think it's so important to start from where you're at. And it's sometimes the hardest thing to do it. I'm trying to do it in my work, in my profession. I'm trying to bring the same like set of operating parameters to my creative work and to my professional work. And it's creating some really weird dynamics where if I try to be really loyal to that, I don't know, just really interesting things arise. It was really helpful to read your last chapter on group dynamics and sort of think over again and again how scarcity, how transparency and integrity, all these things are so important in leadership and participation, but they're easy to let slip. I think it's, you know, you said you had a quote that was like, you know, that this is based on a belief that people can cooperate and to care about each other's well-being rather than the myth that we are greedy and competitive, you know. And I think it's both myth and just habit. You know, I think in the absence of the effort to do the sometimes boring, sometimes tedious work of engaging in the consensus-based methods that you're describing, like it's easy to slip back into a form of leadership that is susceptible to greed. And but on the point, I'm sorry, I just lost the last question in my rambling, but I wanted to respond to it.
No,
Could you, Dean, you know, in our conversations, we've had a lot of questions around decision-making structures. So we've been talking about everything, of course, in the sense of either from a point of view of like this individual trying to work within a system, but how could you just speak to some of your experiences within organizations from the organizational point of view of what are ways of making decision-making transparent? What are tools and techniques that have been successful? What are ways in which tension and disagreement gets hammered out? I wouldn't even say resolved, because I don't think we can assume these things do get resolved, but how do we exist in those modes?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe in consensus decision making, which most people have not had a lot of experience with outside of maybe like in friendships, making decisions about plans. But you know, what that looks like in groups, especially including like larger groups, is it looks like people making proposals and knowing when they're making a proposal about a decision. And so I'm like, I want us to hand out water on Thursdays and Fridays, and I want us to do it, you know, at our storefront and also at the other location. And I bring that to the group, or maybe first I talk to Gia and Aubrey and a few other people to be like, does this sound right to you guys? And they help me refine it a little bit. And they're like, oh wait, no, Fridays we got this. And then I'm like, okay, Thursdays. And then I bring it to the group, and then I'm like, what do you guys think? And then instead of being like, I'm gonna get my idea through, I'm like, well, you know, Mark has this to add. I hadn't even thought about the fact that conflicts with this thing on Thursdays. And Patrick's like, why just water, Dean? What about da-da-da? And we actually make it better, and that we're like more wise as a group. And that's this kind of trust that's about moving away from the human nature stuff that was just being referenced about like, it's me versus everyone else, or I have to get my idea. Like these ways we've learned to think about decision-making really undermine wisdom. And they're about like establishing superiority. And we're trained to either be the one who's pushing our idea through, or be numb to the impact of not being heard and being kind of like appeasing and then maybe resentful. A lot of us have this relationship to our job. We're like, oh, the boss says we're going to do this, and At work, I'm like, great. And then I go home and I'm like pissed and drinking, you know, or whatever it is. Like that whole fucking pattern is toxic, right? And there's a lot of gender and race and ability and all kinds of stuff in there about how we got those different roles and also family roles. It's more complicated than just, we can't script it based on gender and race. We get lots of different versions. But the thing, you know, about this for me, with mutual aid, we're trying to build groups that a lot of people can join, right? And so we want to have the transparency be transparent, the decision making be transparent, so that if you just showed up, you know how to get your idea heard. You're not just like, oh, I just need to wait here and listen to Dean because he's the founder, and you know, and I'm just here to like stuff envelopes. Like, no, it's like we want people to have like immediate, thick relationships of participation. And so having people know how decisions are made and know when a decision making is happening and know that we want to hear from them. So a lot of groups do things like go rounds instead of just like, speak if you feel brave enough, because then we might hear from the same people. But if we did a go around, we might hear from the person we never hear from, and they might say, actually, that word sounds like this to me, and we had no idea, you know. So I think that's really a central piece. And then ultimately, the skill we're trying to build, which we really don't have in our families and love relationships and workplaces, is like, I want to hear you disagree with me. I want to know the thing, how this lands on you. And I'm not going to be like, that's because I was wrong that I proposed it this way. I'm going to be like, oh yeah, oh, interesting. And I am going to stand up for my other view. If I disagree, I'm going to be like, no, it's not like that. You know, like this thing, Gia, that you're saying about conflict, like if you do things you care about with other people and people are actually getting to participate, there will be conflict. Like, look at the world we're living in. Like, look at what we're showing up with. It's going to be conflictual, and also we will definitely run into like white supremacy, sexism. We're going to run into all that stuff between each other. And is there a way to be like, okay, we're not surprised this is coming up. I don't have to make myself bad or you bad. I could be like, this is coming up. You know, there might be something to learn here. Who do I need to talk to get support so that I don't need this person to make me feel better because they just told me what I just said was racist? How can I go to another white person, in my case, and be like, I feel so defensive and freaked out. I'm worried everyone's going to hate me, da, da, da. And then come back with my most adult self on board who's like, wow, I love all these people. I love this project. Can I be with this complexity? Can I see this as an investment in me, this feedback? Can I be willing to learn? Like all of that stuff. These are not skills that there's nowhere to look for this in our society, you know? And so I think that this is like the piece around people needing to do their own emotional work, needing to have a real support system. Most people are really isolated or have relationships that are just about getting affirmed on social media. This creates a very, very low skills for what we're actually trying to do. And the one final thing I want to say about this is like, what the human needs, I mentioned this in the book, but the human needs that I think people are driven by is a need for belonging, a need for dignity, and a need for safety. These are like the things, and there's a tradition I'm part of where people talk about how trauma happens when you had to trade it, right? You were being abused and you had to trade your safety and dignity in order to keep belonging in the group or family, or you said fuck no and you ran away, so you gave up your safety and belonging, but you got dignity, you know, whatever it was, right? Like that's trauma. And what we want is to create groups and spaces where people can actually get those needs met. And that's not going to happen in our workplaces. That's not going to happen mediated by capitalism, probably. You might feel one or the other a little bit sometimes, but what we really want is to create like groups where you consented to be there and you felt those things. And all the other things happen too, like all the hard stuff happened too. And that is possible. But I think that's about like getting to a place where we actually are consensually together and where we actually like move away from some of these like rigid hierarchies and are like, yeah. And so what I would recommend is just like, you know, for all of us is just like, when did I notice that? When does that ever happen for me? Was it my college friends, my high school friends? Like, when did that ever happen? And it's okay if it turned bad later or there was a conflict later, but like, when did it ever happen? And what might've been the ingredients of that? And also what gets in the way of that for me? And so what kind of space do I want to create with others? You know, I think that's like the real question. And then in the book, I have these detailed like suggestions on how to create teams for decision making and how to delegate, how to not have to all as a group decide what kind of toilet paper to buy, but also know when to come back together for a big group decision that does need everyone's view, you know, all of that stuff. Yeah, and there's more beyond that I didn't include in the book. And if anyone's ever like trying to create decision-making processes in a group and want to reach out to me, I'm always happy to like go through problem solving around that with people. That's a lot of what I do these days with groups. Yeah.
That is so wonderful. I just wanted to add that I think everything that you were just talking about, I think it does actually speak to Heidi, what you were saying, in that, you know, the discomfort and the fear that we have of conflict and of discomfort is a tool that it's a dynamic that sustains the denial of these needs. It sustains the power relationships that we find ourselves in. And I think what we begin to learn when we do become comfortable with conflict, when we become comfortable with, knowing our ideas and knowing that they can interact with other ideas, is that it's a practice, and it has to happen a lot and frequently for us to be able to do that work, and resolving or working through those conflicts takes work. So this comes back to the question of labor. Like, what labor are we willing to do for free, or what labor are we willing to commit to? And the labor of communicating and listening, it takes a lot of time. So I really appreciate those last two comments.
Okay. No, I just want to add something that kind of resonated with me, that I think it's also about acknowledging difference, that through consensus, we're not trying to homogenize the group. And I think that we want that the labor is also to understand that we're in this together, but we're not one and the same, and that's how to negotiate this difference. And I'm going to post to the chat one, because we're talking about strategies, and I don't know if you know the work that the Milano women bookstore were doing in the 80s. They had a practice that is called affidamento. I won't explain it, but I will post it because it's a really interesting strategy and resource and exercise to practice that they were engaging with, as in like how to entrust oneself to someone that is very, very different to yourself, and decide from difference. Yeah, just.
I'd love to give audience members the opportunity to ask a question. You can either send it into the chat or raise your hand, and we can unmute you to ask Dean or the fishbowl directly.
Hi, Dean. My name is Vincent. My pronouns are he, him. Question of like, oh shit, I fucked this up. We should redo this, or we should go about this a different way. Walking back, let's say. I think in architecture, and I've only worked in like one corporate office, but imagining if like architects carried through the building, not just maintenance, but like, what if we realized that what we built was damaging or, negatively impacting a community that we were thinking or imagining it would do well or benefit them. Like, in your experience, I guess through like amendments, what would be some advice on how to tackle like reversing or not erasing, but realizing like what you've done is damaging?
Well, question. I'm obviously so not familiar with architecture, but I'm imagining that this thing is finished, and it's like, and I mean, I guess one thing is I think breaking silence around this stuff is so essential. Like, we have so few examples of people making grounded apologies in this world, or deciding to set things to right. And so anytime people model that, I think it's really, really powerful. And it's like, about not covering things up. So that's like the first thing that comes to me is just like, what does it look like to do collective action around exposure? And maybe no one else will join you in that. And so you're individually collectively acting, right? You're individually acting, but with hopes that people will then respond to it who don't know yet. You know, a lot of this is about doing stuff with strangers too. And that means taking risks and being bold around like, what if I'm the only person who admits the mistake, which is like really real. And for me, when I'm doing that, that I've had to do an internal practice about like, you know what, I'm safer than I think I am. I'm more shored up by privilege than I think I am. Am I willing to kind of throw something out there that might mean that I take knocks or lose some kind of opportunities or get blamed, you know what I mean? Like, and that can be really scary in the internet world. But yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I think breaking silence around something like that is probably like powerful. And maybe other people in this group have examples they want to put in the chat of where architects have done that, have like admitted, like, I wish I'd never helped build all this anti-homeless structure around this big building downtown, or all the horrible shit that people are designing, you know. But I think it's really powerful that you're even asking that question. There's a person named Mia Mingus who is like a disability justice activist, transformative justice activist. She has a model around how to apologize that is online that people love. And that is, you know, just something may have principles in it that are of use.
Actually, I want to like follow up to that question, because I think architects have like a particularly difficult time admitting to faults, because our profession is so deeply ingrained in like this world of like, do not admit that you did anything wrong ever because of like the legality of the thing. Like, you actually share as little information with like clients and builders as is humanly possible at any given moment, so that when something does go wrong, you can push it down the chain of command to be anyone else's fault but your own. So it's like so deeply ingrained in our practice to loosen ourselves from responsibility that I would be really curious like how we can start to dismantle the way we think about that in a way that's productive socially. Like, I can see why it's useful in terms of like a structural kind of like condition, but I think social conditions actually loosen that responsibility up, perhaps.
I mean, I think so much of what you're saying gets rooted in architecture education. And again, like, I'm only out from getting my master's for 1 year. So most of my experience is in the education world. And it just feels like that's the core of current studio architecture education, is to justify conceptually every action, from the massing to the choice of nails, and in this sense that were you to undermine any individual portion of it, your entire treatise would collapse. And it's a pretty counterproductive measure in terms of being willing to accept fault, because really, no single small thing is that important, nor should it be that precious. So I mean, a lot of these questions, I think, my mind keeps going to how we teach, and even just the bad group lessons that were attempted to be taught to me, where like I remember just one studio project in a group of 3 people, and my professor telling me, it's like, why hasn't one of you taken charge? And it was just sort of, I was like, well, that doesn't really seem particularly necessary. But it's like those types of interactions that seem primed to make us want to like make these wholesale statements that we can't take back, to establish certain kinds of hierarchies. So I don't know. No answers, but these are amazing thoughts to hear everyone talking about.
I mean, I think to just touch briefly on that, hierarchy is a part of architectural design education itself. Not only taught as a hierarchical method of, I'm the architect and I'm playing God today, and therefore this must be right, otherwise it's not pure to form or whatever. But also when you present a design, sometimes the professor will say, well, I don't quite understand the hierarchy of the room. What's the most important design element? So even the way in which the language which we use to describe design is talking about our ideas and methods of communication is representative of the hierarchical structure that's within that system of education that you're talking about. So I think even at an individual level, changing the way we talk about architecture can lead to changing the way we think about architecture, which will hopefully translate in part to the way we build architecture and engage with architecture with others.
I really appreciate the connection between like choice of language and you know, formal and professional outcomes. Like, I think it's easy to believe that our word choices that from time to time, especially when describing, you know, abstract contexts, don't matter, but they really are the like base fabric of the knowledge structure we're building.
I'll just say, I think that like this has a lot of answers. Like one part of it is like, how do I look at whose labor is least valued in the place that I work and make solidarity with those people? So like labor organizing frameworks, you know, on the fundamental level. How do we also like overthrow the organizations we work in and like turn them into collectives and cooperatives and like force out the like, you know, people who are exploiting everybody and sexually harassing everybody and racially harassing everybody? I mean, like just all that work, you know. How do we start and create like collective organizations we actually want to be in and have relationships we want? How do we change our relationships to like not just our workplace, but also like how we get our food, how we, you know, like how we get our housing, you know, like how do I bring, this is the thing for me, that difference between having a cause and having every part of your life be centered in like radical transformation. It's like every single moment is an opportunity to like come with care, compassion, bold action, collectivization, refusal, you know. And so I just like where are all the places I've drafted in? Am I drafted into this in like my own anti-ageism towards my own body? Am I drafted into this in terms of my own the way that I'm told to relate to the janitors inside the university that I work in, or even just like it's just everywhere. And I think part of that for me too is having people really look at the internalization of like hierarchies of value towards people. So I always think, my example I always use is like everybody wants to take a picture with like Angela Davis when she comes to speak in your town, but nobody wants to like write a letter to a prisoner. Like every single person on this call could be writing letters with prisoners. Like there's just, we all have so many different ways we can give care that are beyond the places we've thought of. And we're being offered them actually constantly by grassroots organizations that are offering us chances like, hey, become part of housing people coming out of prison, become part of supporting young people in foster care to have winter clothes. Like there's a million ways to do mutual aid. And so the question is like, how do I take up those invitations and like also have that inform like every single part of my, and do that in a non-punitive way. Like not like I'm a bad person because I just figured out that I've been being elitist or racist or sexist, but instead like, oh my God, it feels so good to take back my life here and here and here and here and here.
There's one aspect of the readings that I'm Noemi and my pronouns are she and her. And there's one aspect of the readings that I particularly enjoy and was hoping maybe we could take and talk about, which is how mutual aid, or basically maybe more the other way around, how charity is a mechanism to keep the statu quo going, right? To keep things as they are as much as possible, and how mutual aid offers, I think I would say like a more sustainable and long-term and radical actual change. And I think so I am an educator and a curator, and I know a lot of us are creatives. And one conversation that is happening still and has been happening in LA for several years around our professions is gentrification, right? And there's a very clear kind of, pattern of how gentrification happens and the role that architects, artists, creative play as this kind of sandwich moment between, gentrifying, the first step of gentrification, pushing away people of color and to increase rents. So anyways, and I think a lot of the conversation that I've been hearing around that is how can we resist gentrification as cultural workers? How can we be, better or slow it down, resist, not be part of it? And a lot of the solutions find kind of completely inadequate, right? Is it like true tokenism? Is it true like being welcoming to the local community while doing whatever you're doing? Which, I mean, are nothing, but anyways, what I'm trying to get at is that I find that there's, in mutual aid, there's something that I think is really interesting, which is trying to fight the cause rather than the symptoms, right? And you don't extinguish a fire by aiming at its flame, or whatever the idioms is. And like maybe the problem is not gentrification, but the social gap, right? And access to housing. And how can we actually address the cause of gentrification, being social inequalities, and housing not being considered a right, and rather than aiming at the flames. If that makes sense. That wasn't a particular question. It was just an avenue of like how to think about how instead of aiming at the symptoms or the flame, you can aim at the roots, the base, the causes, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. I think the gentrification discussion in like architecture spheres is one of like many discourses where like, everyone's just confused all the time about like, well, what can we do? Like, and it's like, why do we keep talking about what we can do? And I think so it's one of those discourses where like something about it is masking, the actual solutions. So I think in those scenarios, like one of the answers that we have today is to join a mutual aid group or, to find, to not, talk about how sad we think it is, and to start engaging in, like the LA Tenants Union, like thinking about, private property, and actually working with groups that are actually, dealing with the people who are suffering from the consequences. So I don't have like an answer necessarily, but I agree that it's so frustrating, some of these topics that are perpetually unsolvable. And I think what we've come to today is that then let's not waste time on talking about how it's unsolvable anymore.
I have one thing I want to say towards what Noemi was bringing up. And I think, Noemi, what you're talking about is this constant dichotomy that gets set up in the conversation on gentrification, which is that in the context of deep need and deep housing crisis, often what is argued is that spaces that are cultural institutions, spaces of art production, designers are really embedded within the systems that proliferate gentrification. And what that does as a value system is produce a devaluation of cultural work and setting up a false dichotomy that cultural work is separate from crisis response. And I fundamentally don't believe that. I think actually that we need spaces of interpretation and spaces of rethinking and spaces that are intellectual and cultural and joy making in order to enable and, let's say, give even some vitality to what is a really difficult work of continual challenging of these crises, right? So I don't know if that's what you were pointing to, but this is where, coming out of M&A, this is sort of the questions we have also internally is like, what is the purpose of an exhibition when there's so many problems in the world? And I think I'm still resistant in giving up the agency that cultural spaces actually do have in producing alternate worlds and capacities and interpretations, which I think is fundamentally that work.
This isn't super directly addressing like the idea of maybe cultural spaces, but definitely like community spaces, which are can become cultural spaces as well. But I was thinking a lot about the quote in the reading. Also, I'm Virginia and I use they, them pronouns, and I'm in LA. The quote was, how do we hold our values of flexibility, compassion, and justice while building a culture where we show up and do what we said we would? And I guess my immediate thought with that was thinking about two of my friends who I really admire, one in Seattle and one in Portland, who have been engaging with mutual aid work for a long time. And one is 20 and one is 23, about my age. But what they do is they just make friends with people. And something that I think was striking about when Dean, when you were talking earlier, was you were saying like I was a bartender in New York and this was my community. Like this is where I worked and lived and these were the people we were sustaining each other. So it was, of course, by nature, not charity, and it was mutual aid because you were dependent on each other and you were vulnerable to each other. And that's how I see like friends who who went through similar cultural institutions to me and had the kind of parts of white supremacy brought into them. Like I had an experience in 2018 at an Occupy ICE camp with my friend, and she has just become a part of this community in Portland because she really truly became friends with these people. And it wasn't, how can I like give aid to somebody, because I think and still stay comfortable, and still not really change my material conditions. It was, these are my friends now and they don't have a place to live, so now they're going to come shower at my house and we're going to figure out this encampment thing. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe it doesn't look as intense as we're all camped outside this ICE building and showers are at my house, but it's like it is some degree of like, these are my friends now and I'm responsible to it. I'm going to keep showing up and hold my values, like back to the quote of flexibility, compassion, and justice, and show up because I have a personal stake in it because these are my friends. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, Dean, about how we actually know how to do this in friendship and we practice it all the time in friendship. So yeah, I don't know. I also think that that like these cultural institutions are important for vision building, and like places like this, like M&A, it's a place to practice and learn and talk about it and then bring it out to different communities. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I think making friends with people and like going out and making yourself vulnerable in that way, like it doesn't have to be like even through LA Tenants Union or anything. It could just be like anybody, like your neighbor, is like a really good way to practice.
I think on that note, we want to be aware of everyone's time. Thank you so much for staying with us and bringing your thoughts. Thank you so much to Dean for sharing your expertise, your experiences, and sharing your book. And I also wanted to say that if anyone here is interested in doing work that we've done today to create this program, like we are looking for people to join our program board. So if you're interested, like please get in contact with us. So I finally want to turn it over to Gary, because I think you've been taking notes and thinking about what we've been saying, and please give us some final thoughts.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo your comments, Aubrey, to say thank you everyone for participating today. I've been totally energized by the vitality of the conversation, and just super happy with how this has gone. So thanks for taking the time, especially in the morning, especially as we've gone a bit long. And thank you, Dean, of course, for contributing to that energy through your work and your participation today. I'm a member of the program board. I'd be really, really happy if we have other people who want to join the program board of M&A or take part in some of this work and some of these conversations as it happens within our organization or in other contexts. Just really quickly wanted to reflect on some of the key themes that we talked about today, in no way in a kind of final or closed sense, but just in an open-ended mode of reflection. I think it was interesting, we talked, of course, about structures of knowledge and asymmetries of knowledge as they relate to structures of power, whether legal or architectural. And what I thought was really powerful in that conversation was not only the idea of fostering access or even seizing these systems of information, but instead like learning to work, organize around and outside of those very systems. I think it was Mark, you made the, used the phrase practices of refusal or notions of unlearning, which I thought was a really powerful idea. This, of course, relating directly to notions of the profession, which we can understand as a system of knowledge kind of latched onto a particular economic structure. So we weren't only rethinking perhaps how we work with one another in terms of architecture offices or cooperatives or collaboratives, but also notions of designing, not necessarily designing for, but designing with or alongside others, which I thought was a really powerful idea. And specifically the idea that not only should we radicalize the profession, but kind of deprofessionalize in a sense, to take the tools of the profession outside of professional constructs or systems and repurpose them toward non-professional ends. So thinking through then notions of practice and praxis in terms of relations as they relate to larger socioeconomic arrangements, consensus, solidarity across difference, refusal, ways to apologize, the power of language, I think really helped at least me think about the idea of architecture, its complicity, its central role in structuring certain realities, but also its capacity to begin to rethink those very systems. So I wanted to just, echo Aubrey's comments once again to say thank you to everyone. And I hope that the conversation continues. If you are interested in joining the program board, please feel free to email any of us on the screen or info@materialsandapplications.org. We'll be really happy to hear from you.
And Dina, do you have like a final word that you would like?
I just want to say, I was just reflecting on how the way you guys organize this is actually what we're talking about. It was very participatory, like you just really asked a lot of people to be in a lot of different roles in the meeting. So we heard a lot of voices. And I just think that's like a great model of design around what we're trying to do. So thank you for being so thoughtful.
Cool. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.